Hey guys, so what we're going to do is look over inheritance. I'm going to apologize in advance just in case you hear some noise in the background. Um, my family is home, much like you guys are home, um, so there could be people in the background. Try and not pay attention to them. All right. So we're going to start talking about inheritance with objects, which is really cool because it starts to make things look a little more complicated, but much more like how we deal with things in the real world. So, inheritance, what it does is it enables you to define a new class based on a class that already exists. The new class inherits characteristics of the existing class, but it can also have its own methods and data, which are super useful. It's a technique for reuse, and also it makes it so that if you have to make changes in a bunch of classes that are similar, like how do I want to say this? That not similar, but like if they are all part of the same group, then you can do so in the superclass and it goes through the subclass. So if a new class, it has a lot in common with a class that already exists, you can reuse part of the existing class in the new class. The class that's used as a basis for defining a new class is called the superclass or the parent class or the base class. I'm going to use superclass a lot, but I think it's really great to think about it as a parent class because basically anything that comes underneath the superclass, which is called a subclass, would be like the child of a parent class. This is going to be kind of like it will be. The superclass is usually more broad, and the parent and the subclass is a little more specific. So when we actually code it, the child class, when you use the keyword extend, and the child class, it has all the characteristics of its parent class plus any it adds itself. So we look at it as an is-a relationship. That's very important here. So like we'll say this is a subclass here, checking account and saving accounts. They're both child classes or subclasses of the superclass bank account. So checking account is a bank account, savings account is a bank account. We like to use the is a distinction instead of like, there's also the distinction has a and is a. So we aren't going to use has a because we want something that is a. So like a checking account is a banking account, a savings account is a bank account. Okay. They all have account IDs, which is a string. They all have balance, which is a double. They all have deposit and withdrawal methods. Okay. These are written in the superclass. So all of the checking account, it has these things, which are overdraft protection and withdraw, plus everything here that the superclass has. But instead of having to rewrite all of this, they don't have to rewrite all of this because they extend this bank account so they get it automatically. And then savings account, same thing. They get all of these things, plus they have something that's an annual interest. So they have what a bank account has, and then some special properties of their own. So like I just said, inheritance is a relationship. Like a checking account is a bank account, so the checking class would inherit from the bank account class. So the checking account is a bank account. This would be the superclass. This is the subclass. Okay. So we just talked about these a little bit. So I'm going to skip over them because we just talked about them. And you just want to know that when we have inheritance, the child class is inheriting from the parent class. But also, they get everything a parent class has, but they may add new instance variables or methods. They may override methods inherited from a parent class. And they can access the data of the parent class only through getter and setter methods. Now, there is a caveat to this. They can also use the keyword protected. If you use, so like just like how we have public something, private something, the keyword protected means that it is only accessible to anything in the inheritance hierarchy. So, for example, if let's go back here. for a minute. Oh. So if I made these things protected, which is cool, instead of like private string account ID, maybe I'd say protected string account ID. Well, then I could use it within my checking account. But if they're private, I do have to use getter or setter methods. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about was overriding. Okay, to override a method, what I want to do is, let's say I want to add more to the method, or I want to change the method up a little bit, but it's the same method. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the same method header, but I can have something different inside. I'm going to look at that a little closer. Okay. So, like I said, they inherit, both of these inherit all of these. This one adds overdraft with protection. And here you can see withdraw and withdraw are both written twice, or like once here and once here. So what that means is in the checking account, withdraw is written again. And so if I make a checking account, instead of using this withdraw here, it's going to use this one. Now, we can also call what's called super dot withdraw if we want to. And what's going to happen is it'll do this, and then it'll do whatever we want added in here, which is kind of a cool thing to do. So I'll show you a little bit about it in a minute when I do a little bit of coding. And then savings account doesn't have anything that it overrides. So when we override, so remember we talked about overloaded methods, which have the same name, but they have different parameters inside. Overriding has the same name and the same parameters. So that means at compile time, well, not at compile time, at runtime, the computer needs to pick which one it's going to use. If it's a checking account, it's going to use this. Okay? We'll see this a little bit more when we study polymorphism, but just for right now, you need to know what overriding is. Okay, so a subclass can override a method in its superclass. Both methods must have the same signature, so they have to have the same name and number and type of parameters. It allows the subclass to extend the method in the superclass or change it, okay, to suit the needs of whatever the subclass have. So let's say that in bank account, the superclass, withdraw, okay, withdraws the amount if the amount is less than or equal to balance. But let's say we want to allow for that because we have overdraft protection here in a checking account. So now what we're going to do is change it a little bit to, instead of if the amount is less than or equal to balance, or we could say if the amount is less than or equal to balance plus overdraft protection. So this would be overriding this method. Okay. So here's a more complicated example of a class hierarchy. So just so you know, all of the classes that we make actually extend a big class, big O object, like up here, okay? So when you see things that we have seen before, especially in ArrayList, in the ArrayList class where it'll say, like, remember it said in the parameters object E, maybe? Well, that means it's extending anything here. So that's why we have been able to use it with anything that we put in. But everything we make extends object, okay? So we have a person, which is an object. We have a principal, which is a person, a student, which is a person, a teacher, which is a person. And then we can go down further and say a high school student is a student and a college student is a student. So high school student or college student, they extend student and they extend person, which extends object overall. When we have inheritance, the way we write it is like this. Public class, the subclass name, extends the superclass. And then we put all the new data, etc. here. We can assume that the superclass data and stuff, if it's protected, that we own that too. If it's not protected, we need to use getter methods. Okay, so here is the super keyword. So super.methodName invokes the method from the parent class. Remember I was saying you could call like super.withdraw if you wanted from the other class, if you wanted to just add to it, okay? It's used in the constructor, and it can be used in any overridden method of the child class to extend a method of the parent class. And that way we can add more easily without having to copy all of our code. Okay. When we do it in the constructor, we use it a lot, and it has to be the first statement. So here we use super. So like a student, we're assuming that person had a name, an age, and a gender. Okay. And then we have an ID num and a GPA, which pretty much only students are going to have. Or in this case, our students are going to have. So we can assume that the super class would have instantiated with these parameters, name, age, and gender. So that's why we call super name, age, and gender. So we're using the super class constructor. It'll call that and run that. And then we're going to initialize what's new to students. So we're going to say my ID num becomes ID num, my GPA becomes GPA. Okay. Now, remember I said in the constructor for the subclass, the super constructor has to be called first. Okay. But when we use it in any other method, we don't have to call it first. We can call it whenever we want. It doesn't have to be the first statement. So in this case, we're assuming that there's a toString in the person class, okay? And so then we're going to return super.toString, so whatever that toString was, plus student ID plus GPA. That's it for the PowerPoint. I'm going to make another video to open kind of the code so you can see what's going on.